The highway, a long black ribbon dissecting the desolate American night, offered little more than the occasional rumble of a passing truck. For the old bellwether motel, nestled just off its shoulder, time had slowed to a near standstill. Its neon sign, a flickering testament to a bygone era, cast a sickly green glow on a parking lot that was often more empty than full. Inside, James, the night clerk, knew the rhythm of this quiet vigil, a solitary dance with the hours that stretched between midnight and dawn. Most nights, the only sound was the drone of the refrigerator in the small office kitchen or the distant, almost imperceptible sigh of the wind. Guests were rare, often weary travelers seeking a brief respite before continuing their endless journeys. The front desk phone, a relic of an earlier decade, rarely stirred, its silence a constant companion in the profound stillness of the late hours. But then, at precisely 2:53 a.m., a sound cut through the silence, sharp and sudden. The phone rang. It wasn't the polite, measured ring of a business line. It was a jarring, insistent trill, as if desperate to be answered. James's hand, accustomed to only reaching for the coffee, paused. The sound felt out of place, almost anachronistic, given the profound quiet that usually enveloped the motel at such an hour. He picked up, his voice a low, gravelly, "Bellwether Motel, how can I help you?" On the other end, a voice, raspy and frayed, spoke barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for calling this late," it began, each word seeming to carry the weight of immense exhaustion. "But someone has been walking outside my door in room 209. They've been scratching the door for hours." James froze. The room number didn't compute, a glitch in the familiar map of the motel. His mind, usually sharp even in the depths of the night, struggled to reconcile the statement with reality. "Sir, we don't have a room 209. Our rooms end at 208. The room after that has been sealed for 10 years. A silence descended, heavy and profound, clinging to the phone line like a shroud. It wasn't the usual quiet of a disconnected call. It was a silence that felt unnatural, imbued with a strange, non-human quality. Then, the caller's voice returned, strained, yet unnervingly insistent. "No, I just checked the number. It clearly says 209. James's heart began to thud, a hollow drum against his ribs. He instinctively pulled up the security camera feeds on his old monitor, his fingers fumbling with the mouse. Each screen showed empty, silent hallways, fluorescent lights casting long, impersonal shadows. But when he clicked on the corridor past room 208, the screen flickered violently, a burst of static obscuring the view. For one horrific second, amidst the chaos of the static, something materialized on the screen. A tall, gaunt shadow figure, its form vaguely human, with two piercing, glowing white eyes stared directly out of the camera, directly into James. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by the familiar, grainy emptiness of the corridor. James felt his entire body lock up, a cold, paralyzing dread seizing him. The caller's voice returned, now a frantic tremble that barely held together. "No, I just checked the number. It clearly says 209. The caller's voice returned, now a frantic tremble that barely held together. "They keep telling me to open the door. They're saying, 'You finally came back.' But I've never been here before." James's blood ran cold, the phone filled with a deep, guttural static, almost like heavy, distorted breathing from the other end of the line, growing louder, more monstrous with each passing second. Then a sound that ripped through the oppressive static, a loud, metallic bang on the caller's door, deafening and brutal. A gasp from the other end. "I can see a foot under the door, but that's not a human foot." The line went dead.
The dead air on the line was a heavier silence than before, a suffocating void that swallowed all other sounds. James stood rooted, the cold plastic receiver still pressed to his ear, his mind cycling the impossible words, "Room 209." Not a human foot. He slowly lowered the phone, placing it back on the cradle with a hand that felt suddenly clumsy, detached from his own body. The reality of the call was a physical shock, a disruption in the predictable order of his isolated life. His gaze snapped back to the security monitor. The screen now showed the empty corridor feed past room 208, unnervingly still. He tried to rationalize, to dismiss the shadow figure in the caller's terror as a power surge combined with a prank call. But the sheer weight of fear in that final choked whisper was too genuine, too visceral to simply ignore. He had to see the sealed section of the motel. He had to prove it was just brick and dust. The walk down the main hall was different now. Every shadow seemed deeper, every silence more menacing. The familiar, musty smell of the old carpet was replaced by that faint metallic tang he'd never been able to place, like old copper and something sickly sweet. He passed rooms 205, 206, 207, each door a bland, comforting barrier against the night. Then came 208, the last occupied room on the line. He reached the end of the functional motel section. Beyond room 208, the hallway simply ended, sealed off by a wall of rough, gray cinder blocks, a 10-year-old testament to structural failure and lack of budget. James raised a shaky hand, intending to tap the cold, dusty surface, to reaffirm the solid, unyielding reality of the obstruction. This was the end. There could be no room 209. But before his fingers made contact, he saw it. Scrawled across the dusty surface, directly in the center of the cold cinder blocks, was something new. The lettering was faded, yet startlingly vivid, as if painted decades ago, but just dried moments ago. It was written in a thick, bloody red, the color of rust and old sorrow. Room 209, do not disturb. It was fresh, yet impossible. A wave of pure nausea hit him. The writing defied time, defied logic, defying the reality of the sealed motel. As he stumbled back, his eyes caught something on the floor near the impossible inscription. Tucked against the wall was a small, cracked, dust-covered leather suitcase, the kind you only see in sepia-toned photographs. It hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. He forced himself closer, kneeling down slowly, the dust mote swirling around him in the stagnant air. On the suitcase, there was a small, yellowed luggage tag. He reached out and carefully brushed the grime from the faded script. It read, "Checked in, 1978. Checked out, blank." The checkout date was blank, left completely empty, waiting. James looked back at the impossible room number, the bloody writing, and felt a cold certainty settle in his gut.
The cold realization was a physical weight, heavier than the fear itself. This wasn't a prank, nor was it a delusion. The appearance of the bloody inscription and the ancient suitcase meant the impossible had occurred. A gateway had opened where only cinder blocks stood minutes before. James knew he shouldn't touch the suitcase, that it was a relic of a past that refused to stay buried. But the urge to understand the silent guest, the one checked in but never checked out, was overwhelming. He knelt again, pulling the heavy case toward him. The brass latches, tarnished and oxidized, refused to yield to his fumbling fingers. He had to use a small key from his office key ring, one meant for the old supply closet, but which seemed to fit this lock perfectly. The heavy metallic clunk of the latches releasing echoed far too loudly in the dead hallway. Inside, the suitcase was pristine, lined with silk that had long since turned yellow and fragile. Beneath the silk lay a single, neatly folded item, a clerk's uniform from the motel, identical to the one James wore now, yet decades older. It bore a name tag, J. Mills. The fabric was impossibly clean, pressed as if ready to be worn, but the shirt's color was stiff with a dark, almost black stain. Beneath the uniform, a small ledger was tucked away, its cover thick, red, and embossed with the words, "Guest Log, 1978. James's hands shook as he opened the ledger to the current date. Most of the pages were filled with neat looping cursive from 1978. But on the very last page, written in a different, hurried hand, a fresh entry stood out starkly from the rest. The check-in time was marked at 2:48 a.m., just 5 minutes before the call. The name written was only a single bold initial, J. The ledger entry was a mirror of his own identity. The J was him, James, the current night clerk. The implications were paralyzing. The guest who never left, the ghost of 209, wasn't just haunting the motel, it was actively trying to replace him. He slammed the ledger shut, the loud noise snapping him out of his paralyzed terror. He spun around, ready to run, but stopped dead. Standing at the far end of the hallway, by the entrance to the office, was the figure he had seen on the security feed. It was tall, impossibly thin, cloaked in shadow, but the two burning white pinpricks of its eyes were unmistakable, fixed entirely on him. It wasn't moving, yet the space between them seemed to shrink, the air itself contracting. It felt ancient and familiar, like a memory that had clawed its way back into the present. The total silence was more terrifying than any scream. The shadow figure, a gaunt, obsidian silhouette, stood unmoving, yet its glowing white eyes dominated the hallway, the only source of light that didn't feel safe. When the long, skeletal hand lifted, the gesture was slow, deliberate, a silent command for James to approach the sealed wall. It wasn't inviting him into room 209. It was beckoning him to become the occupant. James knew he had to break the paralysis. Survival instinct screamed at him to run, but the figure blocked his escape back to the office, to the phone, to the fragile connection with the outside world. His mind flashed back to the ledger, checked out, blank. The creature wanted the blank filled. It wanted him to take the place of J. Mills, the night clerk who checked in but never left. The figure didn't move its feet, but the shadows around it began to lengthen, crawling across the carpet, seeming to coil around James's ankles like dark ropes. He dropped the red ledger in the suitcase, taking a clumsy step sideways, away from the creature's direct line of sight. He noticed the door to room 208, the last real room, was slightly ajar, maybe an inch. It offered a momentary distraction, a slim chance to hide. With a sudden, desperate surge of adrenaline, James lunged toward the open door and plunged into the darkness of room 208. He slammed the heavy wood shut and immediately fumbled for the deadbolt. The simple click of the lock was a minuscule comfort against the immense evil he had just faced. He leaned his back against the door, pressing his ear against the cold wood, straining to hear any sound from the impossible hall outside. The room was utterly silent, thick with the stale, forgotten air of an unoccupied space. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a sound. Not a footstep, not a groan, but a soft, persistent thump, thump, thump against the door. Not a knock, but a careful, slow, rhythmic patting coming from the other side, just above his head. The entity wasn't trying to break the door down. It was simply acknowledging his presence. Then, the soft patting stopped. A pause that felt like an eternity stretched out. James held his breath, every nerve ending screaming. When the sound finally returned,
It was no longer a thud against the wood, but a chillingly clear whisper that seemed to penetrate the solid door, echoing directly inside his skull, speaking in the caller's exhausted, raspy voice. "You shouldn't have come back, James. Now the door is locked from the inside."
The room was suddenly a tomb. James recoiled from the door, his frantic eyes searching for any sliver of escape, but the tiny window above the bed, the one he knew must be there, was utterly gone. In its place, the exterior wall loomed, an unbroken surface of cold, oppressive cinder blocks. He wasn't just trapped by the creature outside. The room itself had warped, sealing him into an impossible geometry, a pocket of the motel that defied physics and light. He forced himself to stand, his legs unsteady beneath him. The stale air in the room was growing heavier, and now the metallic tang of old copper and sickly sweetness was overwhelmingly present. It was the smell of J. Mills's suitcase, the lingering scent of something that died here long ago. The atmosphere pressed in, turning the darkness itself into a solid, hostile entity that demanded he acknowledge the room's history. He picked up the Bible, the paper cool and dry beneath his fingers. It provided no comfort. Flipping through the pages, he found no inscriptions, no notes, until he reached the book of Genesis. The first page had been carefully cut out. In its place, a thick piece of cardstock was neatly glued in, bearing a single, typed message in a stark, black font. "The beginning is the lie. The end is the checkout." James dropped the book as if burned. The implied reference to the blank checkout date on J. Mills's tag was a direct threat. The entity wasn't demanding his death, it was demanding his permanent administrative replacement, the completion of a failed transaction from 1978. A chill raced up his spine as he realized the cardstock wasn't just glued in, the edges were wet, dark and sticky. He needed to return to the office, to the front desk, to the source of the impossible call. But the figure blocked his path. He had to know the full story of J. Mills. He frantically searched the drawers of the small dresser. The first two were empty, filled only with dust and the stale scent of old wood. The final drawer, however, was jammed shut, as if blocked by something large and unyielding inside.
The dresser drawer finally gave way with a splintering crack, releasing not the expected contents of an old closet, but a cascade of dry, brittle seaweed. It was a thick, black, alien mass, entirely out of place in a desert highway motel. The sight and the sudden sharp scent of salt and stagnant water were immediate proof that the room wasn't just sealed, it was becoming something else, something coastal, something submerged, something that held the memory of an ocean. James stared at the unexpected nautical detritus, the smell of salt stinging his nostrils. He frantically pawed through the material, searching for any solid object beneath the dark strands. His fingers closed around something cold and hard. Not a ledger, nor a weapon, but a small, heavy brass plaque. He pulled it out, wiping the grime away with the frantic edge of his sleeve. The plaque was heavy and solid, etched with a single line of text that offered a terrifying new dimension to the mystery. The Bellwether Lighthouse, Tower Level 209. The old motel hadn't simply sealed off an unused room, it had absorbed a piece of a different, impossible structure. The sealed hallway wasn't the end of the motel's layout, it was the entry point to a lighthouse that, like 209, shouldn't exist. The realization hit James with the force of a cold wave. The caller who whispered of scratching had not been in a motel room at all. He had been in the sealed-off section, the phantom level of a phantom lighthouse, where the walls were porous and the darkness outside was an endless crashing ocean. The thing scratching the door wasn't on the ground floor. It was clinging to the brick high above a forgotten sea. He had to get back to the office, to the front desk phone. He realized the real danger wasn't the monster in the hall, it was the phone log itself, which contained the record of the impossible call, the one thing the entity needed to anchor itself fully into reality. He turned back to the door, bracing himself against the inevitable confrontation. The terrifying patient silence of the hallway was unnerving. He unlatched the deadbolt, the loud clack seeming to announce his surrender. He slowly pulled the door inward, just an inch. The hallway was still there, dimly lit and unnaturally still. The shadow figure was gone, vanished completely. The red inscription, the suitcase, the dropped ledger, everything was precisely as he had left it. It was an open path now, but the silence felt like bait.
The sudden plunge into darkness was total, thick and suffocating. The hallway lights, the only real source of light in this phantom part of the motel, died without even a crackle, as if the power itself had been sliced by a shadow. James stood blind, his eyes useless in the profound blackness. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the silence of the thing that had just been watching him, now invisible, everywhere, waiting. He had to move. The image of the J scrawled in the ledger, and the blank checked outline was a relentless spur. He dropped to his knees, his hand sweeping across the carpet, desperately searching for the dropped red ledger. He needed to destroy the evidence, the document that linked his identity to the entity's incomplete checkout. If he could erase the entry, maybe he could break the connection. His hand found it, the cold, slick leather of the ledger's cover. He snatched it up, stumbling to his feet, turning blindly to run back towards the only promise of light, the faint square of the office entrance at the far end of the hall. He kept his eyes fixed on that single pale glow, a distant, fragile beacon in the absolute dark. He was halfway to the office when the air in front of him began to chill dramatically. The temperature dropped instantly, a pocket of frigid air that smelled strongly of stagnant salt water and the sickly sweet metallic tang of old blood. He realized the figure hadn't vanished. It was merely invisible, waiting directly in his path, creating a blockade of pure, supernatural cold. The pressure was unbearable. James knew he couldn't pass through the creature. He glanced to his left, spotting the door to room 207, currently unoccupied but still a functional, real room. It was a risk, a desperation play, but he knew the moment he paused, the creature would take him. He took the only path available. He stabbed the key into the lock of room 207, turned it, and threw the door open, plunging through. He barely made it inside before he heard the sound, not a crash or a bang, but the soft, wet squelch of a large clawed foot stepping precisely where he had been standing a half-second before. He slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt, the sound of the metal click a defiant note against the silent hunter outside.
James huddled against the door of room 207, every muscle screaming in exhausted terror. This room was different. It was clean, occupied just last night, its reality still intact. Yet, the safety was temporary. The muffled roar of the sea surf was now a deep, persistent vibration, a rhythmic hammer against the walls. The entity was not on the other side of the door, it was on the other side of the wall, pushing the phantom geography of the lighthouse into the physical structure of the motel. He forced himself to focus on the ledger, the one true weakness of the entity. He pulled a small, worn pen from his own uniform pocket, the kind used for guest check-ins. His fingers were shaking so violently he could barely hold it, but he had to erase the entry. He flipped to the final page, found the stark, fresh J entry for room 209, and poised the pen above it. James attempts to vigorously scratch out the name. Instead of rubbing off, the ink instantly bleeds and spreads, darkening and thickening into a beautifully formed, intricate capital J. He stares at it in horror. A small dark red droplet of the ink falls from the pen tip onto his thumb. James throws the ledger violently. It skids across the floor and lands near an old, dark CRT television set. He stares at his thumb. The skin is rapidly losing color and texture, turning chalky white and unnaturally smooth. He rubs it frantically on his pants. The dark screen of the CRT TV suddenly illuminates with a harsh, glaring white light. The camera focuses on the screen, which displays a static, loopable image of the luggage tag. The script is clearly visible. Checked out. J. The surrounding room is briefly illuminated by this spectral white light. James clamps his hands over his ears, his body shaking uncontrollably. The camera pulls back, showing the entire room 207 violently shuddering. The laughing sound causes the TV screen to visibly shape and distort. The last shot is a sustained, terrifying focus on James's face, contorted in a silent scream, realizing his fate. The shattering of the ceiling fixture was the final, definitive sound, followed by a profound, heavy silence. Room 207 was now indistinguishable from the blackness of the hallway. When the motel office phone rang again, it was only 2:58 a.m., 5 minutes after the first call and 5 minutes after James's checkout. The sound was polite, measured, and utterly mundane, cutting through the silence of the empty office. A new figure materialized from the back room, a young man rubbing the sleep from his eyes, wearing a clean, slightly too large motel uniform. He had a name tag that read Thomas. He was merely covering the desk until James returned from his break, a routine task that required him to answer the late-night disturbance. He picked up the receiver without hesitation. "Bellwether Hotel, night desk," Thomas mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. On the other end, a voice, raspy and frayed, spoke, barely above a whisper. It was a familiar, desperate sound, weighted with immense exhaustion. "I'm sorry for calling this late, but someone has been walking outside my door in room 209. They've been scratching the door for hours." Thomas paused, a slight frown forming. "Sir, you must have the wrong room number. We don't have a room 209. Our rooms end at 208. As he spoke, he instinctively glanced down at the guest log, a thick, red leather ledger lying open on the counter. The ledger was open to the very last page. Thomas's eyes scanned the recent entries and stopped at the final, stark line. The name J was visible, but beneath it, written in the same new, spreading red ink, was a single, fresh, bold entry. Thomas's breath caught in his throat as he read the name of the new occupant of the impossible room. On the other end of the line, the familiar rasping voice spoke again, this time with a new, horrifying certainty. "You don't understand. I just checked the number. It says room 209. And the scratching, it just stopped. Now there's a silence, and I can hear something new, a soft, wet, squelching sound coming from right under my door."